Guys, the pandemic impacted our lifestyle 2.5 years ago a lot. From systemic point of view, we started working from home as a crowd because the system had changed. We started following very strict restrictions. If you change the system, people's behavior change. Quote by John Seddon. Let's look at this experience from the change model perspective. This is the change model by Virginia Satir. Do you know the model? Yeah, cool. So the first element was the pandemic itself. And it was really, really strong experience. Yeah? Many companies just have to starting looking for new tools, solutions, rules of cooperating and communicating. Of course, there were many companies that used to work remotely before the pandemic, and there were some companies that had distributed teams, and it was easier for them. But in general, it was a huge challenge. Yeah? And there are at least two biases that disturb us, innovate new ways of working in such a situation. The first one is functional fixedness. What we do, we try to use the methods and tools we used to use before, and they worked. My best example I know is a brainstorm, for example. You know, the brainstorm room, post-its, and people think. When we just try to do brainstorm via Zoom, it doesn't work. It's much better to use asynchronous work and to ask people to prepare make some pre-work and only think together just to make some things things come up. And there is a second bias that can prevent us from effective cooperation, and it is called not invented here. And probably you've heard a lot of times, it won't work in here. It may work in other companies, but not here. So there were a lot of materials about effective cooperation, but some companies use them, some not. When you look at the model, there is a transforming idea stage, the moment when we understand the potential of change. And we just realized, okay, this is the change for our company. We establish new rules, new ways of working, and we are trying to integrate them. And then we have a new status quo. And now I have a question to you. If I set success criteria for new status quo, like that, we've realized the potential of the change for our company. We establish new rules, new ways of working, people behave like that, and it gives us value. Where are your companies? Just raise your hand. You are still in the chaos state, so before the game changer, transforming idea. Who's in the stage? Okay, a few people. The next one, we've just been in transforming idea. So we got it. We don't know how to use it, but we got it. Okay, a few. Integration. We've got it, and we've been trying using it in our teams. Okay, much more. And new status quo. We just got it. Yeah, so we are between integration and status quo. Together with Anita, we hope that most of companies are just before finding the changing game.
And why we thought about it this way? Because what we see in the data from all over the world is that two things are happening now, and this is the high workload, higher than before the pandemic, about up to 85% of employees' time is spent on collaboration. And what we also see is low well-being. And this is observed by, for example, people that are experiencing burnout. They are telling us they are experiencing burnout. And those two things are different than before the pandemic. And what the numbers from many studies over the world are telling us, if you understand the workload in terms of how we invest our time at work, you can think about 3 building blocks. Our time spent on meetings, so we are synchronizing with other people. Our time devoted to deep work, which means that we have minimum 1 hour of uninterrupted work. Work interruption is a meeting, it's an instant message or email, and this is the time we can focus on the more complex tasks. And the third one is a context switching, when we are instantly switching the tasks, context. We are talking on different topics with different people. And what the numbers are telling us, that the time spent on meetings is about 250% higher than before the pandemic, that the deep work time is about 30% lower than before the pandemic, and context switching that is measured by the number of chats per week has risen 45%. Now let's look at well-being. If you think about teams' well-being in terms of 3 building blocks, those are intra-team bonding, so connectivity within our teams. And the numbers are telling us that the number of disconnections within teams is lower by 25% now. If you look at the cross-team learning and connectivity, so bridging connections, we have lower number of them by 30%. And if you think about work-life harmony, measured by longer workday, our days are more or less longer, 10% longer than before.
So what we can do, it's difficult. It's difficult to decide if you can't measure it, if you don't really understand what's going on. So we propose you data which can help.
And what kind of data? Like, we will focus on the data we already gathered, and those are the collaboration metadata from multi-sources. Here we will show you the data from 3 sources, so calendars, emails, and chats. And what is important is, in this approach, like, those are the behavioral data, you should use them with a strong protection of privacy of individuals, which means that you use metadata, not the content. You hash the data on the flow, and the best example is when the keys for hashing are in the infrastructure of a company, and the first record written in the database is in our infrastructure, and you run the reports on a team level only, which means minimum 5 people. Why you are doing that? To provide teams with data-informed feedback about their work habits. Data-informed feedback means that if you have a head of an area, he or she cannot see the results for teams, because this is a feedback mode of providing people with the data. So let's move forward. How we understand the time spent on meetings with this approach. So we are looking at the calendars, and we are looking at the meetings, and just simply how long people spend time on meetings. Then let's move to the deep work. Deep work means the work without work interruptions. So we look at the 15 minutes long time slots in the calendars, and work interruption, it is a meeting or an email send or a chat send. So if you have a minimum 1 hour of time that is not interrupted by meetings, chats, or email send, you have a deep work time. Then the context switching, this is a time when you are doing different things, and we are calculating it for asynchronous activities as chats and emails. So if you have the shorter time slot than 1 hour, or you have 15 minutes in your calendar without a meeting, this is the context switching, because after that you have a meeting or you send a chat or email. So this is the time when you have small time slots in your calendars when you are doing different activities. And then the well-being, intra-team bonding. This is measured by the connectivity within the team. So if you think about meetings, the meetings generate the connectivity between people that are attending the meeting. If you think about email, it is sent from someone to someone else. So there is a connection between two people or more. And the same for chats. So intra-team bonding, this is the connectivity within the team. And cross-team learning, this is the connectivity across the teams when you look the same way. And finally, what do we have here? We have the work-life harmony, and you can calculate this as, for example, the time from the first to the last activity. During the day, activity is a meeting, chat, or mail send. Or you can calculate it more precisely, so you are looking at the 15 minutes long time slots, and you are looking for the meeting or email send or chat send. If there are minimum 3 activities for 15 minutes, you have a busy time, and if this is after your working hours, this is some indicator for working after your working hours, and you can calculate those time slots, how many of them are after or before your working hour.
Mm-hmm. What is very important, we've started with hundreds of data, and what you can see is a kind of summary of those clusters of data that really impacted teams' overload, and well-being. So this is kind of a synthesis of it.
And what is also important is that how those things, how we spend time on, how we build our connectivity, impact other things. So, for example, meetings, this is the kind of workload that increases the chance for burnout 2 times. Deep work is a single most important factor for productivity. Context switching is reducing our productivity by 20% with every task added to the current work, so with every context switching. And intra-team bonding, for example, connectivity with the leader, this is an important factor for our engagement. Cross-team learning, this is the second important perk for millennials. And work-life harmony, this is second important attraction factor for IT people. Mm-hmm. So what's the goal? Like, how we can, like, are there any reference ranges that are telling us what does it mean to have 2 many hours spent on meetings, or too little deep work, or that we do not have the work-life harmony? Those are the reference ranges, and we've done a quite deep dive into the data and into the scientific papers describing the topic. And what we found out the reference ranges for meetings. So the healthy, I would say, range for time spent on meetings is between 5 and 15 hours spent weekly per person on meetings. You can understand it as, for example, if you spend 15 hours on meetings weekly, this means that you have 3 meetings daily that are 1 hour long, or you have 6 meetings daily that are half an hour long. Then deep work. The minimum time spent on deep work is 10 hours, which means that you have 2 hours per day to focus without interruptions. And ideally, it is 2 hours daily. Then context switching. The maximum is 8 hours per person per week, which means that you have 1.5 hours daily for small tasks and switching the context. Intra-team bonding, this reference range is telling us that 90% of employees in a team should have a regular monthly one-on-one with a leader. Cross-team learning, this is the network size you have, and it is between 8 and 18 co-workers per week, people you interact with, but the interaction is mutual, so two-way exchange, and it is also in the group of maximum 8 people. And then work-life harmony, how long is our day? Like 8.5 hours is good enough. It is like healthy reference range, I would say. And of course, those numbers can be tailored for your companies because it also depends on the job families. Like it's hard to compare engineers with agile coaches. But as a point of reference, what we see in companies, this point of reference gave people, you know, the more or less the direction they should follow.
And let's look at concrete roles, newbies.
Yes, what are the experiences now? Those numbers are describing the averages in the cohort of newbies and were calculated on the observations of how more than 1,000 teams worked during the last year, and more than 50% of those teams were engineering, and the smallest company, we get the data from employees 100 people, the biggest one employs 5,000 people. So how do newbies experience the week of work? So they spend, on average, typically 5 hours weekly on meetings. And if you think about people that are in a company for the first 12 months, it might be not enough because they should learn new things, build connectivity, learn peer-to-peer, and build the bonding. Then they have more than 30 hours for deep work and 4 hours for context switching. What about the well-being? So 35% of newbies experience regular one-on-ones with the leader, and they on average have 3 coworkers. And it might be better, of course, because building the personal network means building, like develop informally in the company, and this is also the connectivity thing, so the more connected you are with your team and your company, the higher chances you stay for longer. And work-life harmony, this is quite good.
Yeah, and what about leaders? As you can see, there are more red factors, overload by meeting, too less deep work, not very well about intra-team bonding and work-life harmony. And remember that we are summarizing the amount of time. We don't treat it as a lead time. Yeah, so it's not that they start at 7 and finish at 7 p.m., but we count it all together. And individual contributor, meetings not bad. Context switching too much, intra-bonding could be better. I will share with you one finding from our Monday workshops. There were 6 groups, and 3 of them discussed the pattern from their companies, that the leadership lowered the number of meetings for individual contributors, so developers and specialists, and the side effect is that there are much more meetings for leadership, different roles, Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, leaders, product managers, and I am really curious if you can observe this kind of pattern in your companies as well. So just raise your hand if you can see. A kind of, yeah. So what can drive the change? Based on data, we can see that we could be better, when thinking about overload and well-being. Now we will share with you 3 areas we propose you as a way of impacting these 2 huge, immense areas, overload and well-being.
So first things first, and it means that remote-first micro-habits should be our area of focus. So companies that have been working before the pandemic remotely, the great example is a GitLab, they are telling that building the experiences of people for hybrid work might be a bad idea. That you should build remote-first micro-habits at work. And that offices, they are a great extras, great bonuses, because we can, for example, lower our Zoom fatigue and screen time and have face-to-face interactions. But we should treat them as extras, because when you start thinking about building the experiences for hybrid, you will still have the remote experiences, and you add experiences at the office, and you have to manage 2 models of work experiences, and it is much more complicated than focusing on one area. So remote first by default. And what does it mean? It means that there are many work habits that are working at the office very well, but they are not working when you are working remotely. When you are working remotely. So there are many habits that are more devoted to the remote work and to the remote work. And the clue is to think more about the asynchronous work. And here are some examples. You probably have tried many of them, like live doc meeting agenda. When you create an agenda before the meeting, you also write down some things during the meeting, and then you make the last part after the meeting. Or having a roles for meetings like directly responsible individual, people that obligatory or optionally should attend the meeting. For deep work, this is the blocking 2-hour-long deep work slots in your calendars, for example. Or grouping intra-team ad hoc things before or after the daily. For context switching, it is replying to instant messages in emails in some time slots during the day, not every 3 minutes, and things like that. So those are the habits.
We propose you to treat these habits as small changes as well. So when you introduce many changes in one time, people may feel just overload. So what is better is just to find a pain. What is the pain in the team? The first thing. What is the impact zone? The second. How you can measure the change. And according to this whole system, let's define what kind of work habits you would like to introduce. And do it one by one. So use the work habits, but do it according to the pain and impact zone.
And think about implementing the work habits as micro habits, and we as people, to learn micro habits, we need time, because we are in our old habits, which is our comfort zone. We have the tendency to go to old habits. So just creating an ebook for your company and sending it once, it doesn't work for micro habits. This is a process. This is a continuous process, not an event. And you should repeat, and repeat. Give the feedback to people if this is already working or not, or have some checkpoints, some metrics that are telling you if the micro habit has been adopted or not.
And the second direction is about managing synchronous and asynchronous communication, a huge potential of remote and hybrid work. And it is said that in the office, some things just happened. You know, people talk to each other, collaborate, socializing, and so on. Actually, this is not true, that this kind of things just happened. The offices are designed to things happen like that. So we invite you to think about your team's time slot, your company's time slot, as something that should be well designed, should be well structured. If you change the system, people's behavior change. So here are 4 blocks that we propose you as kind of paintings for your calendars.
Your team's calendars.
Yeah, your team's calendars and your company's one. The first one green for synchro time, the second for deep work, the next one context switching, and the last not least, social and learning time. Here you have a very simple example how you can paint the calendar together with your team and treat it as a contract, as something that you can treat it as a kind of system, yeah, for you and for your team. When you have 2 teams and more, 2 colors is too much. So we propose to focus on green and yellow, deep work and synchro time. When you think about the whole company, it is good to have only time slot. If your pain is synchronizing, let's do it green. If you have a problem with a lack of deep work, just use the time slot of deep work as a company contracting.
And of course, this is your contract, so do it like you prefer, like check the preferences of your teams or your company, experiment at the team level, so try to put colors on your calendar and treat it as an experiment and take a look after 2 weeks if this is suiting us or not, but try to think about your work experiences in a frame of how you experience a week of work in terms of your calendars. Mm-hmm. And the third one is intentional connectivity. All the things that were happening at the office in terms of connectivity, like many of them, they were very natural for us. We had some open spaces, we had coffees together. All of this were happening like more or less naturally. Right now in remote, we need to be much more intentional about our connectivity, because it is just not happening if it's not happening, by purpose. If we do not have write to someone or have a meeting with someone. So be much more intentional. And here you can see another perspective of how you can look at the data, because you can look at the data that are describing the micro habits. For example, the data that are describing you, if you have the culture of accepting and rejecting the meetings, you can have the perspective on your team's weekly calendar. And you can also have a perspective as a network of teams for the connectivity. So here the dot is a team, the lines represent the collaboration and connectivity. Of course, the reality right now is complex, so we work with many, many teams, but the clue here is to take a look at your connectivity just by, discussing with your team what are the teams we would like to work with, we should work with, and think about the connectivity with them. For example, having the same day at the office, having some social catch-ups, coffee catch-ups, just be much more intentional about the connectivity.
So again, just structurize your time slot and your calendar. And to summarize, what are the key areas of impacting? Micro habits at work, balance between sync and async, managing the balance by your calendar, and take care of your team connectivity. And how you can do it, treat it as a continuous process, not event, measuring it and introducing small changes, one by one, not many in one time. Contracts for teams and organization, how you treat your time, how you treat your time slots, how you would like to design it. And the third one, intentional interactions. Again, you have to plan time for socializing if you want that things happen in remote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for micro habits. I will use it. I will use it. And we have a very popular question from Anonymous. Thank you. My team blocks time for deep work with meetings as placeholders. How do you deal with such case?
Yes, this is a popular case, so we just do not treat the meeting with yourself only as a meeting.
That was so simple. And another question from Anonymous. Do you observe that now organizations want to return to work in office? What do you think it comes from?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Do you observe that now organizations want to return to work in office?
I would say that it depends. I can observe the pattern that some things won't work. Yeah, for example, people are overloaded, and what leadership is trying to do is jumping to the approaches they know. So I would say that this is the bias of functional fitness. Yeah, it doesn't work, so we have to use something that we used to use before. And I see this kind of pattern, and I think the data, the real data, and looking out of the box at solutions, rules for cooperation in remote work can help go farther and find better solution in these new circumstances.
And I would say this is the reverse to the old habits. So the new habits, we haven't invented that yet. This is not our comfort zone, so we try to go back to our old habits we know very well.
Thank you. And this is a question probably from a Scrum Master, Anonymous. How about Scrum meetings? Are the Scrum meetings also the meetings?
The question is if the question is about the data. Of course, the Scrum meetings are time for synchronizing, but the question is if we should run them at the same time as we used to do it before remote. So this is the huge question. How we can use asynchronous work, for example, pre-work, brainstorm in a different way, and how we can shorten the meeting itself. I strongly believe that this doesn't work like that we have a time slot in the offices and it should be run at the same time in the remote world.
So the second part of the question was, do you think that we limit those as well?
These
to make
meetings?
it for minimum. for a possible minimum?
I hope we will, but looking at the data, I think that we are before the game changer, before the transformation idea. I would say that we just copy-paste the way we used to work, and even if we shorten the meetings, the question is if they give us proper value. Yes, so I think that we are in discovery phase.
And we have time box, not the slot.
Yeah.
And here is the question I would love to hear the answer from both of you. So the question is, how do you bond when working remotely?
We together.
The question was from Anonymous, so please correct me if I'm wrong. You, but maybe you as a general.
So with Isa, like we are talking about our lives, what happened during the, I don't know, last week, for example. And yeah, we talk a lot about it, I would say.
Yes, we always start our meetings with about 10-15 minutes chats. What's going on? How are you? What are your kids? Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah.
So maybe let's talk wider about how can we bond in general when working remotely.
So I would suggest you to go to the GitLab handbook, because they have 15 different rituals for social and cross-team and intra-team connectivity. So they have games, they have talent shows, they have chit-chats, like many things. They are talking about company goals, many different formats for social are present in GitLab, and they encourage people to spend few hours weekly on such activities.
And I would add one more comment, that it's important to tell people why it's important. They just have to know the purpose, yeah? Why we should do this, and what is it for?
And we have time for one more question, and many more here. But the last question on stage is, I don't understand the categories. What is a newbie compared to individual contributor?
So newbie is individual, like newbie is anyone who's working at the company for the first 12 months. And individual contributor is working for a longer time. And individual contributor is someone who is not leading people, so does not have subordinates. And a leader is someone who has subordinates.
Thank you so much.